Welcome back to my channel. Oh, this looks really cute, like this. Hello, hi, Miniano. If you're new here, hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Naa Momo, and we are here for another episode of Books and a Beat. That's a series I do on my channel where I review a work of literature written by an African author in a makeup look and usually an outfit inspired by the cover of the book. Today we are talking about We Need New Names, written by NoViolet Bulawayo. The book follows the life of Darling and her friends in Paradise, the shanty town that they live in, and then it just follows Darling through her growth from being a 10-year-old to being like a 17-year-old. And through their eyes as children, we see the reality of the life that they live, how the adults in their lives are coping with their circumstances and the hopes and dreams that they have for their future. The book is set in Zimbabwe, mid-noughties, late noughties, and then it just follows like that. There are a few elements in the plot that situate the time for you, so that was a really good reason for me to look into Zimbabwe's recent political history. I don't usually go for books like this because they're pretty heavy and there are always things to research, so I end up going down a rabbit hole and then I can never really stay immersed in the book. This was no different, but I enjoyed having a reason to look into this portion of Africa's history. There are quite a few covers. I've seen 4. 2 of them feature a lot of mismatched elements, which I guess is a callback to the way Paradise as a small town is constructed for the people that live in it. The colors on each cover kind of remain the same, so those are the colors that feature in my look today. So on the very top, there's a light blue streak. Right under it, there's a darker blue streak, and then under it, there's a green streak. Just because the elements on the covers are a bit mismatched, I didn't want to do anything too intricate because I'll do one eye and then I'll be too tired to do the other one. So the base is yellow to match the predominant color on a few of the covers. So there's a smoked out red on my lash line, also features on the cover of the book, and then I line my waterline with white a little on the corner. You will see that my eyeliner is falling apart, and we're just going to take it as a callback to the different misshapen, imperfect elements of the buildings that make up Paradise. Okay, so the eyeliner is peeling because the paint in Paradise is peeling. The eyeliner is cracked because the tin used to make the shanties in Paradise is cracked. It makes sense. I also probably need to get better quality eyeliner, but that's for another day. Also, on my top, it's from 2CD and it says made in Ghana. You could probably also read this as made in Ghana, but it's made in Ghana, it's made in Accra because that's what the girl is, an Accra girl, period. So, as usual, I've kind of broken it down into characters and then the themes, and then at the very end I'll talk about a couple of interesting things that I noted while I was reading. Because our protagonist is Darling, I'm going to talk about her first. She is our voice in this world that we are being immersed in. She's our guiding light, the eyes through which we observe everything and everyone, and the mind through which we gain an understanding of the world. It's important to know that Darling is a child. She's 10, so the understandings that we get on the surface are of a child observing things, but then as readers who have access to more information, we can kind of infer what's actually happening from the things that she's saying and seeing. I find her name to be so delicate for her circumstance, which I guess is reminiscent of people of color, especially Black people who have been disenfranchised, who give their children names that show how special and valued and loved they are, as a way to make it necessary for people who do not see them as such to address them as such. She lives with her mother and her grandmother in Paradise, and we only learn later in the plot about her father and the circumstances under which he's living. In the middle and towards the end of the plot, a big change happens in Darling's life, and so we see her evolution from a 10-year-old who is not very exposed to the world and the different ways that things exist, and see her thrown into a different kind of living that gives her access but also highlights to her how different she is from the place that she grew up. The next group of characters that I'm gonna talk about is Darling's friends, so Cheapo, Bastard, Stina, and God knows. Just like all the children in Paradise, they're making the best with what they have. Earlier in the plot, we understand that they are hungry a lot, and they stave off their hunger by going into an affluent community that's near them and stealing guavas. Following Darling and her friends, the children, just highlights the ways that children get through things, belatedly acknowledging that something isn't right, but not really focusing on that because all they want to do is play. There are a few circumstances among the friends that are really heavy. Like early in the plot, we learn that Chipo is pregnant, and then further down the line, we learn how she got pregnant. That kind of heaviness isn't quite understood by the children. All they know is that something has changed. One friend in particular is the oldest and is a little further removed from the childish obliviousness of the rest of the group, and far removed from being hopeful in any way, shape, or form about anything getting better. The third group of characters that I want to talk about is the adults in Paradise. So Paradise was created following the destruction of homes. There was, I think, in 2005, per the records that I found when I did my searches. It was 2005. Homes were bulldozed, possessions were taken, and people who had the means overnight were stripped of everything that they had and had to create a new life for themselves and for their children. Paradise is one of those shanty towns that is a result of that bulldozing and that recreation of life. The adults of Paradise, through the eyes of the children, we can see that they're making the most of what they have, but looking forward to a future where they have more. They initially are enthusiastic about doing their civil duty in order to ascertain that they will get their due, but as time goes on, they realize that that's not going to happen, and so the disillusion really comes through in the middle of the plot, where we really take a look at who they are and why they are there. And later in the plot, another set of adults that we meet is Auntie Fostalina, who is Darling's auntie, her mother's sister, and Uncle Kujo. Uncle Kujo and Auntie Fostalina are married. They live in the US and they perceive life very differently. I think it's interesting to look at the differences between how the children view the world that they live in and how the adults view the world that they've thrust the children into because of their circumstances. Now we're going to move on to themes. The first one that really stood out to me, it's inescapable. There's no way that you can get around it. The disenfranchisement of the poor. Reading the book makes it very clear to you all the presumably simple things that poor people are not afforded by virtue of their being poor, whether or not it's because of circumstances that they had control over or otherwise. Things like healthcare, sexual education and sexual health support, financial support, or directions to establish themselves in a stable way, a lack of protection from domestic violence, or a lack of systematic support for people who are experiencing and are looking to survive domestic violence. They don't get that at all. And seeing this through the eyes of 5 preteen children who don't really know the weight of what they're observing makes it raw. Another layer of the disenfranchisement of the poor, after looking at the people of Paradise, is the people we encounter in Budapest. Budapest is the name of the richer settlements where the children go to steal guava from. The other adults that we encounter in Budapest are, 1, the security guard who castigates the children for being there, and he's throwing all the words in the thesaurus at them, trying to tell them to leave, and they end up mocking him. And the other group that we meet is made up of young men who storm one of the residences and take the couple that lives inside hostage, not before they destroy everything inside the house. And so, apart from the people who have actually been far removed from being able to do anything that can help them, we have the people who have bought into the notion that protecting the rich and affluent will give them some proximity to that and in turn keep them and their families doing well, and the people who are well aware that things aren't right and are taking matters into their own hands. The second theme that really stood out to me was, as cliche as it sounds, the immigrant experience. The big change in Darling's life is that she ends up moving to America, and her adjustment period kind of read like somebody observing themselves from outside their body as they do something new, something weird, something they never thought that they would be able to do. Apart from that, the shift in focus on what she would consider a problem and issue is very glaring. And while Darling is thinking about these things in her new reality, she's observing people for whom this is a home reality, and acknowledging what they consider to be actual problems. There's a minimization of eating disorders, a minimization of the homeless. In Darling's mind, these are not things that should actually be problems, because where she's coming from, things are so much worse. And so she trivializes them as she observes them, not really being able to empathize with people who live in a place you have been told has so much to give everybody. The last theme that really stood out to me was the sometimes stark difference between wishes and reality. This ties in with the immigrant experience, because the main point for me was the expectations that Darling had versus the reality of what she saw. There's a particular chapter called How They Lived, where the narrator doesn't seem to be Darling. It seems to be like a third party, and they just detail the ways in which people who immigrate to the United States tend to lose that, tend to strip themselves of that strong cultural identity so that they can fit in, draw less attention to themselves, especially when they come into the country and then after a while they are undocumented, or they come into the country undocumented and stay and try and work and make a life for themselves. In order to do that, a lot of immigrants tend to strip themselves of any differentiating factor, and as they grow and they create families, they do not pass these cultural identity markers onto their children. And so the ways in which they would live in a culturally immersive context at home, they don't have in the places that they've immigrated to. Their children don't have that kind of awareness, and they are also further removed. As generations continue, that clear understanding of who people are as a part of a culture, as a part of an ethnic group, is lost until somebody down the line decides that they want to trace everything back. The difference between wishes and reality sometimes is so stark that it hardens people and swallows them up and just prevents them from living a life that is connected to who they were before they made this life-changing decision. Okay, so a couple of interesting things for me in the plot. There was a portion where the narrator talked about the different lives or versions of life that the women in Darling's family knew. Darling knew life before paradise and life after paradise, whereas her mother knew 3 versions of life and her grandmother knew 4. The second thing that I noted that I really enjoyed was the presence of a lot of indigenous language in the dialogue. Per my understanding, this was in Ndebele. In one of my previous reviews, I've talked about how combining indigenous languages with English verb conjugation rules situates the feeling and the weight of what you're trying to say for the reader, even if they don't have a direct understanding of what it is that you are saying. Regarding language, I also think it was interesting to see how Darling's way of speaking evolved after she moves and she's immersing herself in American culture. She hems everything in and leaves those conventions behind, and that to me is just one of the signs that she's becoming further and further removed from her life in paradise, her life in Zimbabwe, and losing her innate connection to that reality of her past. Overall, we need new names, bundles together narratives of seeking better in your country of birth and seeking better in a faraway land. It doesn't give you space to be scared or disgusted or scandalized or taken aback by anything, because that's just the reality of the situation. That is the meat of the situation. For the first 10-12 years of Darling's life, that is all she knew. There was no time for her to be disgusted or taken aback by anything that was happening. And her transition to another stage in her life where she lived in a different place and lived a different reality could not even take that away from her. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, for liking, for commenting, for subscribing, and for sharing. Let me know whether you've read this book. If I left anything that really stood out to you out, please by all means hit me up in the comments. If you are inspired to read it and you want to have a discussion, or you want to leave a comment after you've read it, please feel free to do so. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.